Now, let's go over to our Foreign Affairs Ministry. Our Kwon Soa is there with international reaction and efforts to make Pyongyang pay the price for its latest series of violations. So, what do you have there?
Conn, Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry is operating on an emergency work system, meaning it's on high alert. And officials here have been busy making contacts around the world with their partners ever since North Korea pushed the button on its rocket launch. And the international community was quick to respond to North Korea's latest threat. The U.S. and Japan were among the first to condemn the North for its missile launch. The White House says it's a clear violation of UN resolutions and that Washington will do all it can to protect the U.S. and its allies. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called for, quote, significant measures to hold the DPRK to account. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had a similar response.
Despite our repeated pleas to refrain, we find it absolutely unacceptable that they have launched this missile. To launch a missile after conducting a nuclear test goes clearly against the UN resolution. We will respond resolutely, coordinating closely with the international community.
China, North Korea's closest ally, which has until now resisted calls for stronger sanctions on Pyongyang, expressed its regret about the launch.
Under the current circumstances, China hopes North Korea can exercise restraint and proceed cautiously on the satellite launch issue, and not make any moves that could further increase tensions on the peninsula.
United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has urged North Korea to halt its provocative acts through a statement released by his office saying the launch violates UN resolutions and is deeply deplorable, especially given that it comes despite the united plea of the international community against such an act.
Now, speaking of the United Nations, Security Council is expected to hold an emergency meeting on the North missile test less than 3 hours from now.
That's correct, Conn. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, Seoul had requested for an emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council right after the launch, and that was followed by another call from the U.S., Japan, and South Korea together. And that is why the 15 member states, which Korea is currently not a member of, will be convening for that meeting at the UN headquarters in New York on Sunday, 11 a.m. And that's Monday at 1 a.m. South Korea time. The UN Security Council is still in the midst of drafting a new resolution on the North's fourth nuclear test from January 6th. And that's why there is a lot of attention on how North Korea's rocket launch will affect the sanctions, which means whether stronger measures will be taken or if there will even be another new resolution. Now, Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se told reporters earlier in the day he's considering a trip to New York, if necessary, to discuss the details with UN Security Council member states.
As talks on a new resolution against North Korea's fourth nuclear test are in progress, the rocket launch is expected to spur further discussions at the UN Security Council.
Now, Yoon and his Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida, his Japanese counterpart that is, agreed to close bilateral and trilateral cooperation with the U.S. during a phone call earlier in the evening. And Yoon is expected to talk with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry soon, and we just got informed that the phone conversation will be at 11 p.m. Korea time. And Yoon also said that the talks with Kerry could also continue at the annual Munich Security Conference later this month. Meanwhile, the Foreign Ministry released a document Sunday that outlines South Korea's stance on punitive measures it seeks from the UN against North Korea. It says, quote, an extraordinary threat requires an extraordinary response. So we will have to see how strong the consequences will be for North Korea this time around. That's all I have for now. This has been Kwon Soa reporting live at Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry. Back to you, Conn.